Sometimes fate doesn't bring two people back together to rewrite the past. Sometimes it traps them together long enough to finally understand it. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. And if you believe some conversations arrive years late for a reason, please like and subscribe. Now, back to the story. The elevator doors were almost closed when a familiar hand slipped between them. The motion sensor caught it just in time. The polished steel doors opened again with a quiet hum. Daniel Brooks looked up from the floor indicator. His breathing stopped. Emily Harper stepped inside, as if she had walked out of another lifetime instead of another hallway. She wore a light beige coat over a cream blouse. Her chestnut hair rested neatly on her shoulders. Nothing about her demanded attention, yet the entire elevator suddenly felt too small. She noticed him one heartbeat later. Neither of them spoke. The silence was so complete that the faint vibration of the elevator cables seemed louder than the voices from the busy office lobby outside. The doors closed. Floor 12. The elevator began its smooth climb. Daniel kept his eyes on the glowing numbers above the door. 11. 12. Except they never reached 12. A sharp click echoed somewhere above them. The cabin shuddered. The lights blinked once. Twice. Then everything stopped. For one suspended second, neither of them moved. The emergency lights faded on, washing the silver walls in a pale amber glow. The cheerful background music disappeared. Only the low mechanical hum remained. Emily instinctively steadied herself with one hand against the rail. Daniel pressed the emergency button. Nothing happened immediately. He pressed it again. A crackling voice finally answered through the speaker. There had been a temporary electrical fault. Maintenance was already on the way. Please remain calm. Remain calm. It sounded simple enough. Except calm was difficult when the last person you expected to see in your life was standing less than 3 feet away. Daniel quietly stepped back to give her more space. Emily nodded almost imperceptibly. Even after 6 years apart, they still remembered each other's smallest habits. He always moved away first when she looked uncomfortable. She always thanked him with nothing more than a gentle nod. Outside, somewhere beyond layers of concrete and steel, people continued rushing between meetings, answering phones, laughing over coffee, living ordinary afternoons. Inside the elevator, time had folded in on itself. Daniel noticed the wedding ring was gone. Emily noticed he still wore the same watch she had given him on their 5th anniversary. Neither comment escaped their lips. The seconds stretched into something much heavier than minutes. The tiny cabin held no anger, no accusations, only unfinished sentences that had waited years for someone brave enough to speak them. Then the emergency lights flickered once more, and from somewhere deep inside the shaft came a sound neither of them expected to hear. The sound echoed through the elevator shaft like a distant heartbeat, metal settling against metal, reminding them that somewhere beyond the walls, the world was still moving while theirs had come to a complete stop. Daniel slowly lowered his hand from the emergency panel. They said maintenance is on the way, he said quietly. Emily gave a small nod. I heard. Her voice was exactly as he remembered. Soft, steady, never louder than necessary. Years had passed, yet hearing those 2 simple words stirred memories he had spent countless nights trying to bury beneath work, deadlines, and lonely evenings. The elevator remained perfectly still. Amber emergency lights painted gentle shadows across the brushed steel walls, making every reflection appear older than reality. Neither of them reached for their phones. Signal bars had disappeared. For the first time in years, there was nowhere else to be. No emails, no meetings, no convenient excuse to leave. Daniel let out a slow breath. I didn't know you worked here. Emily looked toward the closed doors instead of at him. I started 8 months ago. He nodded. I moved into this building last year. Another silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. It was the kind of silence shared by 2 people who once knew everything about each other and now realized they knew almost nothing. Daniel noticed the faint silver streak beginning to appear near Emily's temple. She noticed the gentle lines around his eyes that had not existed when they signed the divorce papers. Time had been equally honest with both of them. Neither looked unhappy. Neither looked entirely whole. Somewhere above them, footsteps crossed the lobby floor. A rolling suitcase passed overhead. Life continued one ceiling away. Inside the elevator, every second felt suspended. Daniel glanced toward the digital floor display. Blank. No numbers. No direction. Only darkness. It used to bother you, Emily said unexpectedly. He turned. What did? When elevators stopped. A faint smile touched her lips. You always imagine the worst. Daniel couldn't help smiling back. I still do. For a brief moment, the years disappeared. It was the same conversation they might have shared during a weekend shopping trip or while returning from dinner after watching a movie. Simple, natural, almost familiar. Then reality quietly returned. They were no longer husband and wife. Just two strangers who happened to remember the same life. Daniel looked down at the watch resting on his wrist. Emily recognized it immediately. The navy leather strap had faded with age, but she remembered wrapping it in silver paper before placing it beside his breakfast plate on their 5th wedding anniversary. You still wear it, she said before she could stop herself. Daniel gently touched the edge of the watch. I never found one I liked more. Emily lowered her eyes. She wasn't sure whether the answer brought comfort or sadness. Perhaps both. The quiet humming of the ventilation system filled the space again. No dramatic music. No raised voices. Only breathing. Only memories. Only two people standing close enough to hear each other breathe, but separated by 6 years of unanswered questions. Daniel hesitated before speaking again. I almost didn't recognize you. Emily looked at him this time. Because I've changed? He shook his head slowly. No. A gentle sadness softened his expression. Because I convinced myself I'd never see you again. Emily held his gaze for several long seconds. Outside the elevator, someone called for maintenance. A toolbox rolled across the marble floor. The voices grew closer. But neither Daniel nor Emily realized that the hardest part of being trapped together had only just begun. The voices outside faded again, replaced by the steady whisper of the ventilation fan. Whoever had rolled the toolbox toward the elevator seemed to have stopped somewhere beyond the walls. Daniel glanced at the ceiling, listening for another sound, but nothing followed. It felt strangely appropriate. Even now, help was close enough to hear, but still out of reach. Emily folded her hands in front of her. I guess we'll be here a little longer. Her words were simple, yet they carried the quiet acceptance that had always defined her. Years ago, she had been the calm one whenever plans changed unexpectedly. Flights delayed, reservations lost, rain during vacations. She had always smiled first. Daniel used to admire that. Later, he had stopped noticing. I suppose so, he answered. Another pause settled between them. This one felt lighter. Not because the silence had become comfortable, but because it no longer felt like a wall. Daniel leaned gently against the polished steel panel. How have you been? Emily released a soft breath through a faint smile. That's a dangerous question. He nodded. It probably is. She looked toward the emergency light glowing above the door. I've been peaceful. The answer surprised him. Not happy. Not successful. Not lonely. Peaceful. There was something about that single word that lingered inside the small cabin. And you? She asked. Daniel considered the question longer than he expected. I've been busy. Emily smiled politely. You always were. He laughed quietly. The sound echoed softly around the elevator before disappearing. I guess that's still my default answer. She didn't argue. She simply waited. The way she used to whenever she sensed there was more beneath the surface. Daniel lowered his eyes. The truth is, he hesitated. I don't really know how I've been. Neither of them spoke after that. The honesty itself filled the silence. Outside, faint footsteps crossed. The hallway again. Someone tested the elevator doors from the other side. A metallic knock answered back. We're still working on it, a distant voice called. Daniel looked toward the doors. Emily watched his reflection instead of his face. It occurred to her that he seemed tired. Not physically. There was a heaviness in the way he stood, as if carrying something invisible for much longer than anyone realized. She remembered another version of him. The young architect who once filled notebooks with sketches over breakfast. The man who laughed too loudly at bad movies. The husband who insisted on taking the longer road home because sunsets looked better from the bridge. Somewhere along the years, deadlines had replaced sunsets. Phone calls had replaced conversations. Neither of them could remember exactly when it happened. Only that one day it had become normal. Daniel quietly broke the silence. Do you ever drive past the old house? Emily blinked. Sometimes. So do I. She looked at him, surprised. I thought they sold it. They did. They painted the front door blue. Daniel smiled faintly. It used to be red. You wanted blue. You wanted red. Emily laughed softly. And somehow we ended up with red. For 8 years, they shared the smallest smile. Not because the memory was extraordinary, because it was ordinary. That had been the beauty of their marriage before life became too loud. The little compromises, the grocery lists, Sunday mornings, coffee growing cold while newspapers remained unread. Those moments had never seemed important until they disappeared. The emergency light flickered once, then steadied again. Daniel looked toward Emily. I've replayed our last conversation more times than I can count. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she met his eyes with the same quiet honesty that had once made him feel safe. So have I. The words settled between them with unexpected gentleness. For the first time since the elevator had stopped, neither of them was remembering the day they divorced. They were remembering the life they had almost forgotten. Neither of them noticed how many minutes had passed. Inside the elevator, time had begun to lose its shape. There were no windows, no changing light, no passing floors to measure the distance between one moment and the next. Only 2 quiet breaths and a lifetime that suddenly felt close enough to touch. Daniel rubbed the edge of his wedding watch with his thumb, an old habit he had never managed to break. I've wondered something for years, he said. Emily lifted her eyes. What? He searched for the right words, only to discover there weren't any. When did you know? She didn't ask what he meant. She already understood. When did I know our marriage was over? Daniel nodded. The question remained suspended between them like the unmoving elevator itself. Emily looked toward the polished metal doors. It wasn't one day. Her voice remained gentle. It happened slowly. Daniel stayed silent. I used to wait for you every evening. She smiled faintly, almost embarrassed by the memory. I'd leave dinner in the oven because I thought you'd be home by 7. Another small pause. Then it became 8. Then 9. Eventually, I stopped asking what time you'd be home. Daniel lowered his eyes. Every sentence felt painfully familiar. I wasn't angry anymore. Emily continued. That's what scared me. I was just getting used to missing you. The words landed softly. No accusation. No bitterness. Only truth. Daniel leaned his head lightly against the elevator wall. I thought I was doing everything for us. I know. You wanted the bigger apartment. Emily smiled sadly. No. You wanted it. He looked up. I only wanted you to stop worrying about money. I wasn't worried about money. She met his eyes with calm certainty. I was worried about losing you. The sentence echoed through the tiny cabin more loudly than any argument ever had. Daniel closed his eyes. For years he had replayed meetings, promotions, contracts, business trips, believing every sacrifice had been made out of love. Now he wondered whether love had quietly disappeared beneath all those sacrifices. I remember one Saturday, Emily said. You promised we'd drive to the coast. Daniel smiled weakly. The lighthouse. You remember. I remember canceling. You didn't cancel. Emily's voice remained soft. You forgot. Daniel opened his eyes. He hadn't forgotten the trip. He had forgotten that forgetting it had mattered. The memory returned with painful clarity. Emily had packed sandwiches. She had placed a blanket in the trunk. She had even brought the old camera they used before smartphones. Meanwhile, he had spent the afternoon inside the office, convinced one more meeting couldn't possibly hurt. I came home after dark, he whispered. Emily nodded. The sandwiches were still in the refrigerator. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Outside, the sound of metal striking metal echoed faintly through the elevator shaft. Maintenance was still working. Inside, another repair had quietly begun. Daniel looked at her with eyes carrying more honesty than confidence. I kept thinking there would always be another weekend. Emily's smile held no blame. I believe that too. She folded her hands together. That's why neither of us noticed we had already run out of them. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. Not regret alone. Recognition. For the first time since the divorce, he wasn't remembering court papers or empty apartments. He was remembering sandwiches that were never eaten. A lighthouse they never reached. A woman who had never asked him to become someone extraordinary. She had only asked him to come home. The emergency speaker suddenly crackled back to life. We've restored partial power, the technician announced. Please remain where you are. We should have the elevator moving shortly. Daniel and Emily exchanged a quiet glance. For reasons neither could explain, the thought of the doors opening no longer brought relief. Because there were still words waiting inside the silence. And this time, neither of them wanted to leave them unspoken. The elevator remained motionless, yet something inside both of them had begun to move. Daniel stood with his hands loosely folded, no longer searching for another question to fill the silence. For years he had believed every conversation needed a solution, every problem demanded an answer. Standing only a few feet from Emily, he realized some moments simply asked to be witnessed. The emergency light cast a warm glow across the steel walls, softening every reflection. The cabin no longer felt like a trap. It felt like a room where time had finally slowed enough for honesty to catch up. Emily looked toward the ceiling as another muffled sound echoed through the shaft. "They're getting closer." Daniel nodded. "I know." Neither of them sounded eager. The realization surprised them both. 6 years ago, they had rushed toward the exit of their marriage. Now neither wanted this unexpected conversation to end too soon. Daniel broke the silence first. "Can I ask you something?" Emily turned toward him. "You already have." A faint smile crossed his face. "One more." She gave another quiet nod. "Were you angry with me after the divorce?" Emily considered the question carefully. "I was." She answered without hesitation. "For a long time?" She gently shook her head. "No." Daniel looked puzzled. "What changed?" She lowered her eyes for a moment before speaking. "I got tired. Tired of being angry." Her voice remained calm, almost reflective. It took too much energy to keep reliving the same memories. She smiled softly. "So one morning I decided I wanted peace more than I wanted to be right." Daniel absorbed every word. It sounded exactly like her. Even forgiveness, somehow, had become an act of quiet strength. "I don't think I ever stopped blaming myself," he admitted. Emily met his eyes. "Those aren't the same thing." "No, they're not." Daniel released a slow breath. "I kept thinking that if I had worked less, if I had come home earlier, if I had listened instead of assuming." His voice faded. "There are 1,000 different versions of my life where we never divorced." Emily watched him with gentle compassion. "There are." He looked at her hopefully. "But none of them happened." The sentence settled peacefully between them. Not cruel, not cold, simply true. Outside the elevator, a drill started somewhere nearby before stopping again. Metal scraped softly against metal. The rescue was getting closer. Emily rested one hand lightly against the railing. "Do you know something strange?" Daniel waited. "I don't remember the day we fell in love." He smiled. "Neither do I. I remember moments. The coffee shop. The bookstore. The road trip where we got lost. The first apartment with the leaking kitchen faucet." Daniel laughed quietly. "I spent 2 weekends trying to fix that. And finally called a plumber." They both laughed. The sound filled the tiny cabin with something that had been missing for years. Not romance. Not longing. Familiarity. The kind built from countless ordinary days shared together. Emily looked at him again. "I also don't remember the exact day we stopped being happy." Daniel's smile slowly disappeared. "No, it happened little by little. One postponed dinner. One missed weekend. One conversation interrupted by another phone call." She paused. "No single moment destroyed us." Daniel nodded slowly. "We disappeared in small pieces." For the first time since the elevator had stopped, neither of them was trying to defend the past. There was no score to settle. No winner. No victim. Only two people finally seeing the same story from the same distance. The emergency speaker crackled once again. "Power has been restored," the technician announced. "We're resetting the system now. The door should open in just a few moments." Daniel looked toward the illuminated panel above the doors, then back at Emily. "So this is almost over." Emily smiled with quiet grace. "The elevator ride is." She held his gaze for one long, peaceful moment. "What comes after that is up to us." The elevator gave the slightest tremor beneath their feet. Not enough to make them lose balance. Just enough to remind them that somewhere beyond the steel walls, someone was slowly bringing the machinery back to life. Daniel looked toward the illuminated floor display. A single number flickered for an instant before fading again. Almost. Not yet. He smiled to himself. It felt strangely symbolic. Healing rarely arrived all at once. It returned the same way trust once disappeared. Quietly. One small movement at a time. Emily noticed the expression on his face. "What?" He shook his head. "I was just thinking." He hesitated. "I spent years wishing I could have one more conversation with you." She tilted her head slightly. "And now I wish I'd had this conversation before we signed the papers." Neither of them tried to soften the truth. There was no point anymore. Emily rested her shoulder gently against the polished wall. So do I. Daniel looked at her. Really? She nodded. I kept waiting for you to ask me to stay. His eyes widened. I thought you wanted to leave. I wanted you to stop me. The words hung in the air with heartbreaking simplicity. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. I thought giving you space was the kindest thing I could do. Emily smiled with quiet sadness. I thought your silence meant you had already let me go. Neither of them had been cruel. Neither had betrayed the other. They had simply mistaken silence for understanding. Outside the elevator, another voice called through the shaft. We're almost finished. The technician sounded optimistic. Inside the cabin, Daniel realized they had finally reached the conversation they should have had years ago. I owe you an apology. Emily didn't interrupt. I kept measuring my love by everything I provided. My work, our home, the promotions, the savings. He looked down at his hands. I never realized you were measuring love by something completely different. Emily listened without moving. You measured it by time. Daniel nodded. And I kept arriving home with gifts when all you wanted was for me to arrive. The admission left him almost weightless. There was nothing left to defend. No explanation that could rewrite the years. Only honesty. I've carried that regret for a long time. Emily looked at him with remarkable gentleness. I know. You do? I could see it the moment you looked at me when the elevator doors opened. Daniel's eyes searched hers. I wasn't angry when I saw you. She smiled. I know. I was scared. Emily's smile softened even more. I was too. The silence that followed no longer belonged to strangers. It belonged to two people who had finally stopped pretending they had all the answers. Daniel drew one slow breath. I don't expect another chance. Emily answered almost immediately. I know. I don't even know if I deserve one. She stepped half a pace closer. Not enough to erase the distance. Just enough to remove the feeling that they were standing on opposite sides of the room. Daniel. He looked up. I forgave you a long time ago. His lips parted, but no words came. I just never had the chance to tell you. The sentence reached somewhere inside him that years of success, promotions, and accomplishments never could. He felt no triumph. Only relief. A burden he had carried alone suddenly became lighter simply because someone else knew it existed. The elevator lights brightened. The ventilation system grew louder. With a smooth mechanical hum, the cabin shivered once more. The floor indicator illuminated completely. 12. A soft chime echoed overhead. For the first time since they had become trapped together, the elevator was ready to move. Neither Daniel nor Emily stepped toward the doors. For one quiet heartbeat longer, they remained exactly where they were, understanding that forgiveness had never been about changing the past. It had always been about finally setting it down. The elevator moved so gently that neither of them noticed at first. There was no sudden jolt, only a smooth vibration beneath their feet, followed by the quiet mechanical rhythm of cables pulling the cabin upward. The illuminated number above the doors changed from 12 to 13. For the first time in nearly 20 minutes, they were no longer standing still. Yet neither Daniel nor Emily reached for the door. The movement outside somehow felt less important than the stillness they had finally found inside. Daniel watched the glowing numbers climb. It seemed strange. Emily looked at him. What does? I spent years wishing I could go back. He smiled faintly. And now that I finally have the chance to say everything I never said. He paused. I don't feel like I'm looking backward anymore. Emily understood exactly what he meant. They were no longer revisiting their marriage. They were leaving it with something they had never possessed before. Peace. The elevator slowed. Another soft chime echoed overhead. The cabin stopped once again, this time by design. The doors remained closed for a brief moment while the locking mechanism reset. Daniel laughed quietly. We're still waiting. Emily smiled. Maybe fate enjoys dramatic timing. He looked at her. You've changed. She raised an eyebrow. In a good way? In the best way. She folded her arms gently. I don't think I've changed that much. You have. Daniel's voice carried quiet certainty. Years ago, you always tried to fix everything. And now you simply let things be. Emily considered his observation. I spent a long time learning that not everything needs to be repaired. She glanced toward the closed doors. Some things only need to be understood. Daniel lowered his eyes. I wish I'd understood that sooner. Emily stepped beside him, close enough that their reflections blended across the brushed steel wall. We both learned. She spoke with calm honesty. You learn not to confuse providing with loving. And I learned not to confuse silence with rejection. Daniel looked at her. We really were trying. We were. For all those years. Emily nodded. We just kept trying in different languages. The sentence lingered between them. Love had never disappeared. Its translation simply had. Outside, voices became clearer. Someone tested the elevator doors from the hallway. A green indicator light appeared above the frame. The system was ready. Daniel felt an unexpected heaviness settle inside him. Not regret. Not hope. Gratitude. He realized that if the elevator had never stopped, they would have walked past each other like strangers. A polite nod. Perhaps a quiet hello. Then another 6 years of unanswered questions. Instead, fate had interrupted 2 ordinary afternoons and quietly rewritten the ending of a chapter both believed had been permanently closed. Emily reached into the pocket of her coat and removed her phone. The screen lit up with dozens of missed notifications. She smiled before locking it again. They can wait. Daniel looked at his own phone. The same flood of emails. The same unanswered calls. For once, none of them felt urgent. I used to believe every minute mattered. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Emily smiled. And now I think I spent too many minutes worrying. About the wrong things. The elevator doors gave a soft mechanical click. A thin line of bright white light appeared between them. The gap widened slowly. The familiar sounds of the office returned all at once. Footsteps across polished marble, distant conversations, ringing telephones, the hiss of the espresso machine from the lobby cafe. The ordinary world had been waiting outside all along. Daniel and Emily remained still for one final heartbeat. Neither reached for the opening. Neither hurried toward the life waiting beyond the doors. Because both understood something they hadn't known when they first stepped inside. The elevator had never trapped them. It had given them the one thing neither time nor distance ever could. A quiet place where 2 unfinished hearts finally found the words they had been carrying for years. Then, without another word, they smiled at one another and stepped forward together into the light. The lobby greeted them with the ordinary rhythm of an ordinary afternoon. Employees crossed polished marble floors with paper cups of coffee. Phones rang behind the reception desk. A courier hurried through the revolving doors while someone laughed near the cafe. The world had continued without noticing that, for 23 minutes, 2 lives had quietly changed inside an elevator. Daniel stepped aside, allowing Emily to leave first. She smiled. Thank you. The words sounded strangely familiar. Not because of their meaning. Because kindness had once been the language they spoke every day. They walked together across the lobby, neither rushing toward the exit. Their footsteps echoed softly beneath the high glass ceiling as sunlight poured through the windows, painting long reflections across the floor. When they reached the revolving doors, they stopped. Outside, the city stretched before them. Cars moved through the afternoon traffic. People hurried across the crosswalks. The breeze carried the scent of roasted coffee from the corner cafe they had once visited almost every Saturday morning. Emily noticed it first. They're still there. Daniel followed her gaze. The little cafe had changed its sign, but the old wooden tables remained. Exactly where they always had. He smiled. I didn't know. I walk past it sometimes. You never go in? She shook her head. It always felt like it belonged to another life. Daniel understood. Some places became memories the moment people stopped sharing them. Neither beautiful nor painful. Simply untouched. A silence settled between them once again. This one was different from every silence inside the elevator. There was no unfinished conversation left inside it. Only choice. Emily looked at her watch. I should get back. Daniel nodded. So should I. Neither moved. Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and slowly removed a small leather card holder. He hesitated before speaking. I don't want to pretend today didn't happen. Emily listened quietly. I'm not asking to go backward. His voice remained steady. I'm not asking for another marriage. I'm not asking for promises. He looked directly into her eyes. But if one day you feel like having coffee with an old friend. He handed her a simple business card. I'd like that. Emily accepted it without looking down. Instead, she reached into her own handbag and found a small notebook. She tore out a blank page and wrote something by hand. Not an email, not an office number, a personal phone number. She folded the paper once before placing it gently into his palm. You don't have to wait for someday. Daniel looked at the folded note, but didn't open it immediately. I mean coffee. A warm smile appeared across her face. Nothing more. He smiled back. Nothing less. The breeze lifted a loose strand of Emily's hair. Without thinking, Daniel almost reached toward it. His hand stopped halfway. Old habits no longer belonged to him. Emily noticed the movement. Instead of stepping away, she tucked the strand behind her own ear and smiled with quiet understanding. Some gestures no longer needed to happen. Remembering them was enough. A taxi stopped near the curb. Emily glanced toward it. That's mine. Daniel nodded. He wanted to say something profound. Something worthy of everything they had shared inside the elevator. Instead, he found himself saying the simplest truth. I'm glad it was you. Emily's eyes softened. So am I. She opened the taxi door before turning back one last time. You know, Daniel waited. For years I thought our story ended because we failed. She smiled gently. I don't think that anymore. He looked at her questioningly. I think it ended because we became different people. A small pause. And today? She glanced briefly toward the office building behind them. We finally met those people. Daniel watched her disappear into the taxi. The car merged quietly into the afternoon traffic until it became another vehicle among hundreds. He remained standing on the sidewalk with the folded piece of paper still resting in his hand. For the first time in years, he did not feel like a man who had lost his past. He felt like someone who had finally made peace with it. And somewhere above the lobby, the elevator doors quietly closed again, ready for the next strangers who believed they were simply traveling between floors, never realizing that sometimes the shortest journey in a building becomes the longest journey back to yourself. 3 weeks later, Daniel stood outside the little corner cafe with both hands wrapped around a paper cup that had already grown cold. The morning city was waking slowly. Bicycles rolled past beneath rows of maple trees. A barista arranged fresh pastries behind the window while soft jazz drifted through the open door. Sunlight spilled across the sidewalk in long golden bands, warming the same wooden tables that had witnessed countless ordinary Saturdays years before. Daniel glanced at his watch. 9 o'clock. Exactly the time they used to meet before driving nowhere in particular. He smiled at the coincidence. Or perhaps it wasn't coincidence at all. At precisely 9:03, Emily appeared at the end of the street. She wasn't rushing. She never had. A light beige coat rested over a navy sweater, and the breeze lifted a few strands of her hair as she crossed the intersection. She noticed him before he noticed her, and for a brief second, she simply watched him standing there, no longer the man always checking his phone between meetings. When Daniel finally looked up, their eyes met. He smiled. So you came. Emily returned the smile. I said I would. There was no dramatic embrace. No lingering silence heavy with unspoken romance. Only two people greeting each other exactly as they were. Older, wiser, lighter. They ordered coffee. The same drinks they had once memorized without asking. Black for him. A vanilla latte for her. Neither commented on remembering. Some memories did not require explanation. They chose a table outside beneath the shade of an old maple tree. For a while they watched the city instead of filling every quiet moment with conversation. Daniel realized he no longer feared silence. Emily noticed it too. You've changed. He laughed softly. You already told me that. I know. She stirred her coffee. I'm saying it again. Daniel looked across the table. So have you. Emily smiled. I hope so. You don't apologize for taking up space anymore. She looked genuinely surprised. I used to. You did. He remembered dinners where she let everyone else choose the restaurant. Vacations planned around everyone else's schedule. Dreams postponed because there was always something more practical to do. Now she sat comfortably in the morning sunlight, completely at peace with simply being herself. It suited her. After another quiet moment, Emily reached into her handbag. I brought something. She placed a small photograph on the table. Daniel picked it up carefully. It showed the old lighthouse they had never visited together. Blue ocean, white sky, a weathered wooden fence overlooking the cliffs. You went. She nodded. Last weekend. Daniel smiled. How was it? Emily looked toward the horizon beyond the buildings. It was beautiful. She paused. But not because I finally made it there. He waited. It was beautiful because I realized I wasn't visiting the place we missed. She smiled gently. I was creating a new memory. Daniel looked down at the photograph again. For years he had believed healing meant recovering everything that had been lost. Now he understood. Healing was allowing new memories to stand beside the old ones without asking either to disappear. He handed the photograph back. I'm glad you went. I'm glad too. They finished their coffee slowly, talking about books, work, neighbors, favorite walking trails, and the ordinary details of lives that had continued growing even after they had grown apart. Eventually they stood. No promises were exchanged. No declarations of forever. Only the quiet understanding that whatever came next would never be built on regret. As Emily turned to leave, Daniel called her name. She looked back. Thank you. For what? He smiled, his eyes brighter than they had been in years. For getting into the elevator that day. Emily's expression softened. I almost took the stairs. They both laughed. Then they walked away in different directions, not because love had failed, but because it had finally become something gentler than possession. Some stories end with two people finding each other again. Others end with two people finding themselves. And sometimes, if fate is especially kind, those become the very same story. Because the elevator was never the miracle. The miracle was that two hearts, separated by years of silence, finally chose honesty over pride, peace over regret, and gratitude over what might have been. In the end, they did not rewrite their past. They simply refused to let it write the rest of their lives.